Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're venturing deep into the woods, to those secluded cabins where the silence can be deafening and the shadows hide more than just trees. There's something inherently unsettling about being isolated, surrounded by nothing but wilderness, far from the safety of civilization. Tonight, I've got 3 true horror stories sent in by people who experienced the absolute terror of a cabin getaway gone wrong. These aren't just campfire tales. These are real accounts that will make you rethink your next wilderness adventure. So dim the lights, get comfortable, if you can, because these stories are designed to haunt you long after they're over.
Our first story comes from a listener named Sarah, who, a few years back, decided to go on a solo writing retreat. Sarah was a budding novelist, and she needed absolute peace and quiet to finish her manuscript. She found the perfect place, a small rustic cabin nestled deep within a national forest in Oregon. It was advertised as off-grid luxury, which really just meant it had a generator for electricity and a well for water. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just her laptop, and the endless expanse of towering pines. She arrived in late autumn, the air crisp and carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The cabin itself was old, built from dark, rough-hewn logs with a porch that overlooked a dense part of the forest. Inside, it was cozy enough. A wood-burning stove, a small kitchen, and a single bedroom. Sarah felt an immediate sense of calm, a detachment from the frantic pace of city life. This was exactly what she needed. The first few days were idyllic. She'd wake with the sun, make a strong cup of coffee, and write for hours, the only sounds being the chirping of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves. In the evenings, she'd cook a simple meal, read by the glow of an oil lamp, and listen to the wind whisper through the trees. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Then things started to shift. It began subtly, with the sounds. Sarah noticed a distinct echo, not a natural echo like her voice bouncing off a canyon wall, but an echo of her own actions. If she dropped a pen on the wooden floor, a split second later, she'd hear the faint clink again, as if someone else in the cabin had dropped a similar item. She dismissed it at first. Old cabin, creaky wood, settling sounds, right? But it happened with other things too. She'd shut the kitchen cupboard and hear a soft thud from the other side of the cabin. She'd sigh, and a faint, almost imperceptible sigh would seem to drift back to her. It was unnerving, but she tried to rationalize it. The isolation was playing tricks on her mind. One afternoon, she was taking a break from writing, sitting on the porch, sipping tea. She yawned, a wide, stretching yawn. A moment later, she heard it. A soft, distinct yawn from somewhere behind her, from inside the cabin. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She slowly turned, peering through the screen door into the dim interior. Nothing. No one. The cabin was empty. She felt a prickle of cold sweat on her neck. She went back inside, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. She told herself it was her imagination, fueled by too much solitude and too many spooky stories she'd read online. She tried to focus on her writing, but the words wouldn't come. Every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind made her jump. That night, she couldn't sleep. The echo phenomenon had escalated. She'd turn over in bed and hear the rustle of sheets from across the room. She'd clear her throat, and a faint cough would follow. It was like something was mimicking her, shadowing her every move within the cabin walls. She lay there rigid with fear, staring at the ceiling, straining her ears. Around 3 a.m., she heard it. Not an echo this time, but a distinct, heavy thump from the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen. She held her breath, listening. Silence. Then another thump. This time, it sounded like it was right outside her bedroom door. Sarah's entire body tensed. She reached for the small, heavy flashlight she kept on her nightstand. Her hand trembled as she clicked it on, a weak beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. She slowly, painstakingly got out of bed. Every muscle screamed in protest, urging her to stay hidden under the covers, but the fear of the unknown was worse. She crept towards the bedroom door, flashlight held high. The thumping had stopped. The cabin was utterly silent, save for the frantic beat of her own heart. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she pushed the door open. The living room and kitchen were shrouded in shadow. She swept the flashlight beam across the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The chairs were where they should be, the table was clear. She cautiously moved into the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. And then she saw it. On the counter, where she had left a bowl of fruit earlier, a single apple was lying on its side. It wasn't a dramatic fall, it was like someone had gently placed it there. But she had left it in the fruit bowl. And next to it, on the pristine wooden counter, was a faint, circular indentation, as if something small and heavy had been pressed down. And radiating out from that indentation, faint but undeniably there, were 4 distinct finger-like smudges in the dust that had settled on the counter. Sarah felt a scream building in her throat, but it never escaped. Her flashlight beam wavered, shaking uncontrollably. She knew, with a horrifying certainty, that she was not alone in that cabin in the woods. The echoes weren't just echoes. They were a presence, a watchful, mimicking entity that had been observing her, learning her habits, and now it was making its own presence known. She backed away slowly, her eyes darting around the kitchen. The air suddenly felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. She scrambled back into her bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it with the flimsy latch. She pushed her dresser against the door, even though she knew it wouldn't stop anything truly determined. She spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, flashlight clutched in her hand, every shadow seeming to twist into grotesque shapes. The sun eventually rose, painting the forest in hues of orange and gold. But the beauty did nothing to calm Sarah's terror. The first thing she did was pack her car, throwing everything in haphazardly. She didn't bother cleaning up. She didn't even look back at the cabin as she sped down the long, winding dirt road. She never went back to finish her manuscript there. To this day, Sarah says she occasionally hears the faint echo of her own movements when she's alone in her apartment. A sigh, a creak of a chair, a muffled drop. She tries to convince herself it's just her ears playing tricks, but deep down, she knows. She brought something back with her from that cabin in the woods, something that had learned to mimic her and was still, quietly, somewhere in her life, echoing her existence. Our next story takes us to the desolate, snowy mountains of Colorado, recounted by a man named Mark. Mark, his wife Emily, and their 2 young kids, 9-year-old Lily and 7-year-old Ben, decided to rent a cabin for a week during winter break. It was a beautiful, large A-frame cabin, secluded and surrounded by untouched snow, the perfect, picturesque family getaway, the kind of place you see in Christmas movies. The cabin had a massive stone fireplace, and keeping it roaring was essential for staying warm in the biting mountain cold. This meant frequent trips outside to the firewood stack, which was located about 50 yards behind the cabin, next to a small, frozen stream. The first few days were fantastic. The kids built snowmen, they went sledding, and in the evenings they'd all gather around the crackling fire drinking hot cocoa. Mark was in charge of the firewood, and he actually enjoyed the chore. The crisp air, the silence of the snow-covered forest, it was a nice break from the cozy warmth indoors. On the 3rd day, as dusk began to settle, Mark headed out for another load of wood. The air was still, and the only sound was the satisfying crunch of his boots on the packed snow. He reached the firewood stack, which was neatly organized under a tarp, and started pulling out logs. As he bent down, he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper from the tree line just beyond the stream. He straightened up, scanning the darkening woods. "Hello?" he called out.
his breath fogging in the cold. Nothing. Just the vast, silent forest. He told himself it was the wind or his imagination. He picked up his armload of wood and headed back to the cabin. Later that evening, as he was stacking the wood inside, he mentioned it to Emily. "Thought I heard something out by the stream when I was getting wood," he said casually. Emily just shrugged, engrossed in a board game with the kids. "Probably a deer," she offered. The next morning, the whisper returned. Mark was out getting wood again, the sun barely above the distant peaks. He heard it more clearly this time. A low, guttural murmur, too rhythmic to be the wind. It seemed to come from the same spot, just beyond the frozen stream where the trees grew thick and dark. He stood still, straining to hear. It sounded almost like a muffled conversation, but he couldn't make out any words. A chill, colder than the mountain air, ran down his spine. He called out again, louder this time. "Is anyone there?" Silence. The murmuring stopped abruptly. He felt an intense, undeniable sensation of being watched. He grabbed his wood, hurrying back to the cabin, his gaze darting nervously into the dense woods. That afternoon, while the kids were playing in the snow outside, Lily came running inside, her face pale. "Daddy, Daddy, I heard someone talking!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Mark and Emily exchanged a look. "Where, honey?" Emily asked, trying to sound calm. Lily pointed towards the back of the cabin, in the direction of the firewood stack and the stream. "Over there, by the stream. It sounded like sad talking." Mark's blood ran cold. He tried to reassure her, telling her it was probably just the wind again, or maybe some other hikers, even though they hadn't seen anyone else for days. But he knew. He knew what he had heard, and now his daughter had heard it too. From then on, Mark made sure to bring one of his kids with him whenever he went for firewood, or Emily would stand on the porch watching. He felt foolish doing it, but the thought of facing whatever was out there alone, especially after Lily's confession, was unbearable. One evening, it was snowing heavily. A thick, relentless flurry was blanketing everything. The cabin was warm, cozy, and filled with the scent of pine. The fire was dwindling, and Mark knew he had to brave the storm for more wood. He asked Emily to come with him, but she was busy settling the kids for bed. "Just be quick, and don't go too far." Mark bundled up, pulling his hat low and zipping his jacket to his chin. The snow was falling so thickly he could barely see 10 feet in front of him. He pushed through the deepening drifts, heading for the firewood stack. The silence was even more profound now, the falling snow muffling all other sounds. He reached the stack, quickly grabbing logs, his movements urgent. As he turned to head back, he froze. He wasn't sure what he heard, but it was different this time. Not a whisper, not a murmur. It was a faint, distorted sound, almost like a choked gurgle, followed by a soft, rhythmic thump. 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 It was coming from the area just beyond the stream. He couldn't see anything through the blinding snow, but the sound was undeniably there. It sounded heavy and wet. He felt a wave of absolute dread wash over him. He started backing away slowly, clutching the firewood. Then he saw it. Through a momentary break in the falling snow, a darker shape in the impenetrable darkness of the woods. It was tall, impossibly tall, and thin, standing perfectly still amongst the trees. It seemed to be facing him, or at least facing the direction of the cabin. And as he watched, horrified, it slowly, deliberately began to lift its arm. Not just lift, it was like something was pulling it up. And as it lifted, he saw something else. Hanging from its hand, or what he assumed was its hand, was a dark, limp mass. And that thump, thump, thump sound. It was the sound of that limp mass lightly striking the snow-covered ground as the impossibly tall figure slowly began to drag it away deeper into the forest. Mark didn't wait to see more. He dropped the firewood and bolted. He ran through the heavy snow, not looking back, his lungs burning, the image of that towering, gaunt figure and the thing it was dragging burned into his mind. He burst through the cabin door, gasping for breath, terrified. Emily rushed to him, seeing the pure terror in his eyes. He tried to explain, but the words wouldn't form. He just pointed frantically towards the back of the cabin, towards the blizzard-swept woods. They spent the rest of the night huddled together, the fireplace roaring, Mark occasionally peering out the window, seeing nothing but falling snow. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The world was pristine, untouched. Mark, with Emily urging him to investigate, cautiously went back out to the firewood stack. His dropped logs were still there, covered in fresh snow. He slowly approached the stream, peering into the woods where he had seen the figure. There was nothing. No footprints in the fresh snow, no disturbed branches. It was as if whatever he had seen had been swallowed whole by the blizzard, leaving no trace. He looked back at his own frantic tracks in the snow, confirming he had indeed run back to the cabin. They left that day, cutting their vacation short. Mark never told the kids exactly what he saw, just that it was too cold. But he'll never forget that image. The impossibly tall figure, the strange, wet thumping, and the utter, chilling silence of the snow-filled forest. What was it? What was it doing? He'll never know, and perhaps it's better that way. Our final story comes from a young couple, Liam and Chloe, who decided to celebrate their anniversary by renting a charming, isolated cabin in the Smoky Mountains. It was a beautiful two-story cabin with a wraparound porch and stunning views of the misty peaks, the kind of place you see in postcards, perfect for a romantic escape. When they arrived, they found a small leather-bound guest book on the coffee table. It was filled with entries from previous visitors, detailing their wonderful experiences, their hikes, the beautiful sunsets. Liam and Chloe smiled, flipping through the pages, excited for their own memorable stay. The first few days were exactly as they'd hoped. They hiked, cooked meals together, and enjoyed the quiet solitude. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, watching the stars, feeling completely at peace. One night, Chloe picked up the guest book again. "Let's read some more," she suggested. As she flipped further back, the entries became older and the handwriting changed. She found an entry from about 5 years prior. It was written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. The words were a bit smudged. October 12th. Beautiful cabin. Peaceful. Heard a strange scratching sound from the attic last night. Probably just critters. Wife thinks it's nothing. Hope so. Chloe frowned. Scratching in the attic, she mused. Probably squirrels. Liam nodded. Yeah, old cabins, bound to have a few uninvited guests. She turned the page. The next entry was from the same person, just 2 days later. October 14th. Scratching is worse. Not like squirrels. Sounds deliberate, like fingernails. My wife is getting scared. Keeps saying she hears whispering. I don't hear it. Am I going crazy? Cabin feels cold, even with the fire going. Chloe shivered. That's a bit creepy, she said, looking up at the ceiling of their cabin. Liam tried to laugh it off. Probably just a vivid imagination. People get spooked when they're isolated. They continued reading. The next entry was dated October 15th, the very next day. This one was even more unsettling. The handwriting was almost illegible, jagged and panicked. October 15th. It's in the walls, not in the attic anymore. We hear it moving, pressing against the wood. My wife is getting scared. Keeps saying she hears whispering. I don't hear it. Am I going crazy? Cabin feels cold, even with the fire going. Liam and Chloe looked at each other, their casual smiles gone. This was starting to feel less like a charming quirk and more like a genuine account of terror. This is really messed up, Chloe whispered. Yeah, Liam agreed, a knot forming in his stomach. But look, they left. They got out. Chloe flipped to the next page. It was blank. The one after that, blank. And the next several pages, blank. It was as if that couple had been the last to write in the book for a long time. Then suddenly, a new entry, much more recent, from a different person. April 3rd. So glad to be here. This cabin is so restful. And then, more normal, happy entries followed, right up to the present day. See, Liam said, trying to sound reassuring. They probably just forgot to write more, or the book got replaced. But Chloe wasn't convinced. Why so many blank pages after their last entry? And why such a panicked last message if they just forgot? They tried to put it out of their minds, but the seed of unease had been planted. That night, as they lay in bed, the cabin felt different. Every creak of the old wood seemed amplified. The wind outside sounded less like a gentle sigh and more like a mournful wail. Around midnight, Chloe stirred. Liam, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Do you hear that? Liam was half asleep. Hear what? Scratching, she said, her voice laced with fear. From the attic. Liam instantly remembered the guest book. He sat bolt upright, his heart pounding. He listened, straining his ears in the darkness. And then he heard it. A faint, rhythmic scritch, 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 coming from directly above their heads, from the attic space. It was exactly as described in the guest book, like long, sharp fingernails dragging across wood. He grabbed his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the wooden ceiling. The scratching stopped. See, he tried to rationalize. It's probably just a mouse or a bat. But the scratching started again, this time from a different part of the attic, closer to the wall. It was louder now, more insistent. And then Chloe gasped, Liam, I hear it! The whispering! Liam held his breath. He didn't hear anything, just the frantic pounding of his own heart. But Chloe was clearly terrified, her eyes wide with fear, staring up at the ceiling. It's calling my name, she whimpered. Chloe! Chloe! Liam, despite not hearing it himself, felt a primal terror. The panic in Chloe's voice was real. He hugged her close, trying to protect her from the unseen horror above. The scratching intensified, sounding like whatever was up there was moving with purpose, circling above them. The air in the room grew noticeably colder. They spent the rest of the night huddled together, Liam staring at the ceiling, waiting for something to break through. He kept telling himself it was just critters, but the guest book entries, Chloe's absolute conviction that she was hearing whispering, it all pointed to something far more sinister. The next morning, exhausted and terrified, they decided to cut their trip short. As they were packing, Liam, compelled by a morbid curiosity, decided to take one last look at the guest book. He flipped back to the entry from October 15th, the panicked last message from the previous guest about getting out. But as he looked at it, his blood ran cold. The final sentence, which he clearly remembered as "getting out of here tomorrow, must," now had a chilling addition. Scrawled below it, in the same frantic, jagged handwriting, were 3 new words: We didn't leave. Liam slammed the book shut, his hand trembling. He looked around the cabin, at the silent walls, at the seemingly empty attic above. He didn't want to know who had added those words, or when. He didn't want to know if they were still there, in some unseen form, waiting. He just wanted to leave. They packed their bags in a frenzy, not even bothering to clean up. As they drove away down the winding mountain road, Liam glanced in the rearview mirror at the cabin, now small and distant. He saw nothing unusual, but he knew. He knew what kind of horrors that guest book held, and the unspoken stories of those who had stayed and perhaps never truly left. He knew there was something in that cabin, something that learned your name, and once it did, it didn't want you to go. And there you have them, 3 true stories of cabin getaways that turned into nightmares. It just goes to show you that sometimes the quietest places hold the darkest secrets. The solitude can be a blessing, but also a curse, especially when you realize you're not as alone as you think.